Hello, how's everyone doing? Pretty excited about this. My name is Mike Weatherk. I'm a producer with Made with Unity. We're a small team that gets to work with the awesome creators in the community, you guys. And we've had the honor over the last 6 months to be able to work with a team that we're very proud to bring to the stage today to answer some questions and talk about what they've been working on. So first, you guys know who he is. He's the co-founder of Oats Studio. He's worked on some incredible movies, couple up here, and we saw a debut of the new short that he created in Unity, and we'll talk a bit about that today. But it's my honor to bring up Neill Blomkamp. I don't know where the mics are. Awesome.
I'll just grab one of these. Does this work? Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, man.
Thank
you.
Awesome.
I like my prison mugshot photo as well. It's good.
I tried to find the CG one that you had up yesterday. It's pretty awesome.
The Sprigs one.
Yeah, no one even knows that was a CG Neill on stage. It was pretty cool. And so the next person I'd like to bring up is the tech supervisor at the VFX supervisor at Oats. He's worked with Neill for quite a while. This is Chris Harvey. So, as you can see, one of the movies that they both worked on is Chappie. So, I'm not even sure. Is that the first movie that you guys worked on together?
That was the first film that we worked on, yeah. And it just felt like a good working relationship, you know.
Cool.
Yeah.
And my understanding is a good number of the team actually worked on Chappie as well.
Yes. Tetzlaff modeled Chappie, there he is. Tetzlaff modeled the moose and Chappie, and Earl brought them to life, and that's it. Yes.
A few others. Yeah. Cool. Well, we can look at that. So let's talk about Oats. I'm sure you've been talking about it nonstop for the last couple of days, but obviously the crew that and what happened with Chappie, and you decided to branch off and kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you know. When I was making Chappie, there was this moment where I felt like this idea that I had that was like 10 years old, where I wanted to have this miniature kind of incubator, this place that could make films, shorter films that could be tests for bigger pieces, and it just felt like a creative workshop. I actually started kind of putting into effect. I'd sort of thought about it for a long time and never really done anything with it. And so during post on Chappie, I started seriously trying to figure out how to do that. And by the time I had finished that film, I moved into actually, you know, getting a new space and speaking to Chris. My brother and Chris were the two people that really went about manufacturing the environment that we would need, from VFX to production and, you know, finance and setup and everything else. So I just really liked working with Chris on Chappie, and I knew that the artists really liked him, and that he would build an awesome team, and that, you know, he's kind of a savage. So we brought him on, and he's, yeah. You want to say anything?
No.
Okay.
It's funny because that's actually it's a very interesting story, because I know there's a lot of people in the Unity community that have worked on big games, worked on AAA games, and they've kind of gone indie, and that's sort of what you guys have done with Oats. So
yeah,
it's very interesting, sort of parallel paths, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's this environment where the idea is that we can end up making stuff that looks really high end, and that, you know, has a lot of the same sort of approach that you would apply to a feature film. But if you wanted to scale it down, and you wanted to do something that was 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and just experiment with an idea, that it was versatile and nimble enough that would never get lost. And so starting off with pieces the size of Zygote or Raka, or even the Atom piece that we did, is a good way to kind of, they're big enough that clearly, like, we could handle something the size of a feature, but they're small enough that we can do several of them, you know, and you know, be in a place where you can look at a few different ideas and be like, okay, that one's cool. We want to go further with that one.
I remember you mentioning when we started working together, it's like the 2-hour movie, but it's the 5 minutes that you really want to watch. It's like the snapshot of like the cool part of the movie.
William Gibson said that about some of the pieces.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Adam. So that's kind of what brings us all here today. What's the story there? Like, what was the motive? Like, it obviously ties into this short piece idea.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to be doing stuff from really high level production, straight up, like, you know, camera crews and helicopters and location shooting, to traditional VFX, to real time, you know, engine based films that were recurring, that had a lot of you know, some of them were comedy actually, and we actually built some of the environments for the real-time pieces. The bigger pieces like Raqqa started taking up too much resources, so we didn't finish. And so while we were in that mindset, Adam came out, the first one that Unity had done, and all of us were like, damn, that's kind of exactly like what we were talking about doing. And the story was really interesting. So then when you guys and Isabel contacted me about, is this something that Oats would like to take further? It was interesting to us technically, but it was also interesting to us, I think, creatively, to write it and expand on it. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to elaborate on that, like from day one on Oats, I remember like pitching Neill on like, well, we got to build like this tiny little R&D group and like start looking into real time, because it really was something we wanted to like push. Obviously, we didn't do that then because resources were going into the bigger projects, but it was always, the idea of real time was always something that we had sort of in the back of our minds and wanting to push to it, because it opens up some very cool ideas when we start talking about some of the smaller pieces that could be like episodics, that could recur, and you just go back again and again and again to this sort of real-time world that you've created. Yeah,
you talk about the Cheers set. Yeah, it's like the reusable one.
Right, yeah, and the Jeff Darrow stuff. We bought some of Jeff Darrow's illustrations for a short series we wanted to do called Rest Stop. And Rest Stop, I mean, we should actually do that now in Unity.
We'd love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about, well, actually, at this point, I was going to show, let's watch the short again. And let's see here. So we'll need audio here.
You want to know what you are? live in the walled city of the Consortium. You were cut away from your bodies. You can't remember because the Consortium wiped your mind. One felony conviction saves the lives of 10 citizens. Only your brain is of no use to the Consortium. And your brain is tainted. We don't know why they keep us alive. To what end? But it has been this way for generations. I had to unlock you. Otherwise, you would have wandered aimlessly till your batteries failed and your brains suffocated. I chose life for you. I will always choose life. But for those of you ensnared in the illusions of the past, the mirror can tell you who you once were.
The mirror? What's that?
What is the mirror?
The mirror reads the traces of your mind. She knows your histories, your crimes.
Consortium Criminal Code, Article 1-1A, Felony, Treason, Article 1-1B, Felony, Terrorism, Crimes against the Consortium, a terrorist attack at the Tacoma Walled City, a political dissident.
I love it. I've seen it so many times, and it still just gives you a chill. It's so cool. So let's take a look at so we've got a couple things that I kind of want to go over, sort of the behind the scenes. We've got a good number of the Oats team here that can help us kind of show a bit of how this was done. But first, I'd like to just kind of get into a bit of like what's it like expanding a universe like this. You saw the first short, and it's kind of it was obviously super compelling, and
Yeah.
but it's kind of a blank slate in many ways as well.
Yeah, it felt like an opportunity to kind of really get into some interesting mythology of how the prisoners got there and where they're going, and it was very open. So I actually just realized this is the first time I've ever taken on other source material that actually got finished as a film, besides Alien and Halo. So that's good. But no, it's like, it was actually a very, very, very creative, cool process, because something really interesting existed, and it allowed for a sort of a blank slate. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. And I wanted to try to write something that felt like it was uplifting, that there was this element about it that felt like it was sort of ascendant, like it was going somewhere positive. And I kind of focused on that, and went down the road of trying to make like a sort of a Star Wars diagram of how everything would link together. And then we knew for the first two films we wanted to make to pick like smaller stories out of that would just give the viewer something to continue on from the first film, which is this one with the character, and then the second film would introduce something new.
Right.
So that was the philosophy.
That's super cool. I've got a couple concept art images here that were done really early on, and I'm really struck by how close the finished movie is to these concept art images.
Yeah.
Is really, really cool how, yeah, with this vision, somehow you guys were able to make it come to life.
Right, and these were also, once obviously we had already created sort of reference of lighting for both films, you know,
Yeah.
from the real world. So there was a lot of almost like iron smelting factories that had this mixture of warm and bluish light. Yeah. Obviously, all for the first film. The second film is entirely sunlit. And then the other thing was the Kuwait oil fires I was really interested in. I don't really know why. I don't know if that was a hangover from just, I don't know, there's something visually interesting about that. So we went down this road in broken future North America that you would have these pockets of gas and oil that were on fire, and that was part of their journey.
Super cool. And obviously what you guys are well known for is this mixing of the real world and hyperrealism, and that process obviously, I guess, led to photogrammetry naturally, or was that just a conscious decision? Or?
Well, I mean, I think, dude, just jump in here and take this at any point, because otherwise I'll...
And maybe then I'll bring some of the...
Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically, I mean, photogrammetry, Chris and I think, have a similar philosophy with, you know, visual effects, or whatever you want to call it, seeming as though it's all becoming really one thing. And it's kind of like throwing out traditional ways of doing things unless they're the obvious way to do something, and, you know, it makes sense. Yeah. So photogrammetry just felt like, you know, you're sort of bending the rules in a way that ends up with a really cool looking result. And this isn't the project, obviously, that has live action in it, but if the two of us talk about live action, we often come to the same conclusions on, like, it only really matters to what the viewer is seeing. So will this create the best result for the viewer from an audience perspective? So in the situation of the second film, it was like, how do we make the most realistic looking sun-bleached desert environment? Like, let's just find one for real and then extract it three-dimensionally and put it into the engine.
I know, seeing the reference photos and then starting to see the 3D environment, and it's really, really crazy how close it is. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using photogrammetry for years now, and it is really an awesome way to, like, capture digitally real life, you know. And part of what was so cool about this process was, I guess, some of the familiarity to a live action shoot like we did. There was normal scouting as if it was a normal live action shoot. We went down, we blocked out scenes, we figured out, like, where the action would take place, we walked the whole thing out, and then we also, you know, took 35,000 photos. So there's a very familiar, like, sort of pre-production phase to it, right, which grounded in something familiar for us, which I think was probably very beneficial. And then, yeah, you end up with all the sort of strange little oddities that you don't think to put in necessarily as a modeler, or if you do, you really have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out, oh, well, what would be the random thing that would happen on the edge of this wall? It's like, well, you don't have to worry about it, it's just there. Right. And I don't know if you... might be a good time to start bringing the guys up, because
yeah, for sure.
There's definitely.
Like, I know you guys also did a second photogrammetry shoot at your outside the office, and this is sort of the general flow that you guys went through. So you have the real world props, and then you obviously take photos, and I don't know, maybe one of the guys.
Yeah, can I just bring them all up?
Absolutely,
and then start?
absolutely.
So I don't know if you guys want to come and find a seat.
I don't know if you want to do introductions.
Sure.
This is the Oats team.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe I'll just let them introduce themselves so I don't butcher anybody's name, even though I know them.
I'm Sean. I'm responsible for all the... No, I'm not a seamstress. I'm a tailor. I did all the clothing and cloth sims.
Hi, I'm Corey. I was responsible for animation. I worked mainly on the second short that we haven't shown yet.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm responsible for the environments.
Mike, TD, like animation and timeline.
Jim Spoto, technical director.
My name is David Kuo. Deal mainly with characters.
Hi, my name is Young Binin. I'm lighting artist.
Earl Fast, animator, mainly responsible for this short.
Jeff Tetzloff, mostly hard surface model and texture.
Jeff, give it to Jeff.
So yeah, in terms of the second shoot, like, I'll just let Jeff talk about it, because he's the one that had to set it all up and spend 2 days out in the sun taking pictures.
Yeah, the cool thing is I come from more of a games background, so the cool thing with working with these guys was they did have that access to the sort of the film sort of repository of items. So what everyone's sick of modeling the box, right? Or the barrel. We've done that 1,000 times as environment artists. So we had this great access to a lot of prop companies. So what we did, literally from a catalog, we want that box, that barrel, that thing, that rope, whatever. They all shipped it in on a truck, and because it was sunny, we set up you can see up on the one thing, the big shade up there, we set it up under a shade and just started shooting all that. And we ran back into the studio, which is right there, that's that wall, and we quickly checked to make sure I covered myself with all the photographs with my guys and said, okay, we're missing these photographs, or you messed that one up, and go back out and shoot it, process it through reality capture, get it cleaned up real quick, and it was in Unity. And we can, I don't know, it might take, 3 days to do a box, ultra realistic like that, all in, and we could do something like that in less than an hour. It's pretty fast. So, and you can even use, you don't even need a high-powered camera, you just have to get practice doing that sort of stuff. It takes a few times to get used to how you have to get your angles in, and you do it with your phone. Easy enough. It was a great time saver.
It's cool. I know one of the big challenges of photogrammetry is typically delighting. How is that? I know Unity's released a delighting tool. Is that something that you guys used? Or?
Yeah, we use that for these things specifically. I actually didn't use it myself. I was busy doing other things, but a couple of my people did, and that helped. And the big thing with photogrammetry is try to always shoot in shade or overcast days. If you're in a high sunlight situation, it's really hard to delight it after the fact. So that's another good tip. Sort of thing.
Super cool. And we got just another shot of the finished assets in Unity. And it gives you the full PBR, texture flow and everything. The next big thing, obviously, in all of it is just the performance capture. And a huge amount of time was spent on that. So I maybe just give me a run through of that. I've got a couple shots from the shoots, but.
Yeah, I mean, the idea there was to try to just get as close to the performance, obviously, as the actors, as we could capture. So, Chris and I spoke a bunch of times about what was the best way to do to recreate facial movement inside of Unity and what that meant on the shoot day. And the only part of this process that I would alter is that we captured facial performance and body performance separately. And I almost feel like taking the hit on having several cameras in an array on an actor's face, and taking a little bit of a resolution hit, but having their performance matched with their body perfectly is worth the loss.
Right.
But other than that, it was pretty traditional. The untraditional part, I guess, was bringing the facial stuff into a real-time engine the way that we did.
Yeah. So I mean. Basically, Alembic was sort of crucial to our entire pipeline, not just for faces, but for cloth, which you'll hear about later. But you can see there on the screen, that's sort of on the left is sort of the traditional head-mounted camera, and he's wearing all the markers. So that was the body performance, which we would get, and then the secondary performance. After we got the take that Neill liked, we'd kind of rush them over to the corner, and they'd sit in front of this blue screen with some LED panels and 9 cameras, and they would try to reenact their performance.
Yeah, and I mean,
face.
obviously, most of this is from the second film, so you guys actually haven't seen this.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give it to Corey because there did come, like Neill said, it's not ideal. It'd be much better to capture it all at once, and there were certain challenges that came up.
Yeah, as I said, it was we mainly incorporated this on the second film, which I guess you guys will see pretty soon. There's a lot of facial animation or kind of facial capture in it. Essentially, we had maybe like a 10-shape, blend shape library, so we could do ambient shapes on top of the face for the stuff that we didn't capture. Otherwise, it was just a matter of, it was pretty simple. It was just a matter of kind of taking like all the body mocap we had, which was provided by Animatrix, and it was really nice, and kind of just, marrying the face stuff onto it. We just had Alembic sequences to just kind of find the right timing, put it in. And then we had corrective shapes on top of the rig, or we had rigging on top so that we could kind of correct some of the shapes. It's pretty straightforward. We had a lot of reference to check out the eye movements and make any fixes or tweaks that we kind of needed to. And then we kind of just gave it over to Mike Ferrario, and he kind of put it in the engine for us. Yeah, as I said, straightforward.
So is it very different from like a normal directing session that you guys would normally do, or?
No, it's exactly the same. I'm just wondering though, with the eye stuff, if we glued tracking points onto their eyes, would that have helped you?
Well, it would have helped, yes.
We should look into that.
Well, I heard that Jared Leto blinded himself for the whatever it was.
Yeah.
Cool. I also want to talk about the mirror because this is such an awesome character. What was the inspiration for this character?
I actually don't. I wrote this with Thomas, and I don't remember if I came up with the mirror or he did. But I know that he came up with the swimming eyes, with the liquid eyes. But there was the whole idea further into the mythology would be that you end up with these human brains inside robotic shells that are the outcasts of society, and the consortium has kicked them out. And so the really interesting part about Adam, which we haven't done yet, it only exists in concept art and in writing, is the culture and the sort of homemade, broken city of all of these people that have gathered together. And in that environment, we have this kind of like tribalistic shaman kind of feeling to a lot of it. And so mysticism and psychics and these elements were a really big part of that writing. And she obviously represents that. So the idea with her was that it was sort of similar to the Traptions in that her body is synthetic. That's the idea.
And that's actually reminded me, I love how you guys have customized every single Traption. They've got like the solar panels on their heads. And they've through the journey in the desert, they're all slightly worn and torn.
Yeah, and that gets way more crazy. Like if we make more and take it further, there really is way more concept art that exists than what we made. And the self-modifications to them and how tribalistic they become is a big part of their community.
So cool. So that kind of, some of the concept art you talked about. So these are some of the early clothing designs and some of the concept art for her face.
Yeah.
And then obviously the tailor put together the costume.
So this stuff here,
no.
This isn't his job yet.
Oh, okay.
He's the tailor, but he's a digital tailor.
Oh, he's the next slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell me about this. Like you actually made real costumes, and one of them's downstairs in the gallery.
Kristen, who works in the real world and is a real world costume maker, built these for us in real life, so that Sean could make them virtual and bring them into his secret sort of boudoir of seamstressing. So yeah, and what they did, which was interesting, I never really thought that Chris and everybody at Oats would do this digitally. My idea was just to make that, and that would inform what Sean did because it came from the real world. What they did that took it further was they actually shot reference footage of all of the costumes being used, so that the dynamic simulations of the cloth had at least they were trying to match the right weight or fabric density or thickness, so that was cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Sean, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of how you used what they did?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of cool how Neill tries to make everything look super real. So I think this was a really interesting approach. Normally I would have just tried to find some patterns and put it together, but I had the actual costume made, and the girl Kristen who made them, gave me the actual patterns after with totally perfect specs.
And she's also in the office too.
Yeah.
She's like right there as well.
Yeah, and she would, like when another character you haven't seen yet in the other film, she would say this is how it has to all go together. I needed to know that so that I could build. So that pattern you see in the slide there is the actual pattern of that particular costume. Put that together. I scanned all the textures with this magic tricks that Chris came up with, so they look super real. And then once they're built correctly, they move correctly, so then they look real, and that's why they look so real.
Cool. I've got a short video of that on the next slide here. Let's take a look if it plays. Oh, of course, it's going to make me log. Oh.
You had it there.
Is that actually playing? No, it's not going to play. Let me see if this plays on the proper screen. No.
I can see it. It's right there.
Yeah, I know. I get
looks
that.
amazing. I'll just describe it. There's
Actually,
like a CG character walking with a cloth sim that looks amazing.
If you actually are
So
curious
good.
about the cloth sim, the video that he's trying to show you is a clip of, if you go down to the showcase or showroom floor or whatever, in the gallery there's like a display with 3 of the costumes there, a bunch of stills, and a whole video that sort of shows all the steps and behind the scenes of the clothing, which is pretty cool.
Why is this
while he's trying to figure that out, I'm going to pass this over to David maybe to talk about some of the look dev shading that, like, he got sort of the photograph texture scans from Sean, and then shading would have to get put together.
What about full screen with that one?
Yeah, so overall it's a huge process, obviously. And so once I got the stuff from Sean, there's lots of tiling patterns that needed to be utilized on different cloth. For example, you can see the perforated parts of the cloak. And traditionally, and still is transparency is huge difficulty in real-time graphics. So we spend a lot of time kind of working through that. There's so much technical depth there that a lot of it I'm not even going to attempt and explain. But once we got past that part, it's just about setting things up in a test scene like that. Actually, you can see that's kind of our look dev scene. I usually take characters' assets into that scene, then I check it out with the lighting there. Once that's done, then we take it into the actual scene with the actual lighting, because there's always some discrepancies that you would see if you put an asset into a drastically different lighting all of a sudden. So from there, and I got to give a shout out to Abby, who put together the lighting for that scene, and he also did a lot of the look dev on the mirror. A lot of the light limitations and workarounds that we have to go through to really get the mirror looking this good is just a huge team effort in general.
It's so impressive to me, the number of things that are going on this character. Like, there's a normal skinned character underneath, and you have the cloth sin on top, and then the facial performance, and then the crazy eye thing, and which was done through tessellation and some custom render texture stuff. It's like, but it all comes together so seamlessly. It's super impressive.
Yeah, the eyes was like, that's a whole other challenge, because she, unlike the other characters that you'll see, isn't an exact replication of the actress. You know, she's almost, but then she's, you know, obviously got a lump on her head and her jaw skin's been removed, and then she's got these swimming eyes. So
it was very difficult to cost that.
Yes.
To find her, so we had to do it digitally.
So we'd have her raw performance capture like before, but we'd have to then translate that onto the slightly modified mesh. And then the last step was, what are these eyes going to look like? And we had one of our modelers, Ian, who did a bunch of, I don't know, I think he did like 30 different wedges of style frames that were like digital, like 3D mock-up models of it. Neill kind of made a select on the one he liked, and then we gave that to Jim and said, make that. And I'll maybe let him talk a little bit to it.
Sure, so this was a lot of fun to do. But going back to Neill's notes, I believe it was described as being like a ferrofluid-like effect. If you're familiar with what that is, what a ferrofluid is, you induce a current and it kind of creates these insane shapes. So we used Ian's reference and decided to, well, we discussed potentially doing it in a 3D application, and then just using our limbic caching, which we had used for cloth and for face, to just do a denser version of that, and so displace it in the 3D app and bring it in. But we were concerned about the density and cost of that. And we were also concerned about maybe the iteration time. And I thought, hopefully, we could find a way to do this interactively and in hardware. So what we ended up looking at is taking our skin shader, integrating tessellation in hardware, which we were able to do, and then integrate displace tessellation. And if you look at the Unity documentation, there are actually examples for Shader Lab for doing that, more or less at a higher level than what we ended up actually doing. The problem was we didn't have normals for those displaced, for the displaced geo, which otherwise seemed to be working quite well. So what, right about the same time, fortunately, as fortune would have it, 2017 one shipped, and here was this kind of cool new feature called custom render textures, which I looked into, and realized we could actually leverage that here. So what I ended up implementing was a 2D simplex noise masked to her eye orbit, so the area around the eye, and then we run that simplex noise into a couple different waveforms and combine those. and we were able to get the displacement that way. But we couldn't solve the geometric normal problem where our displaced geometry didn't actually have correct normals. So what I did there was use another custom render texture, feed the displacement map into it. The shader for it then did dynamic normal generation from the displacement, and we used the normal map as a proxy geometric set of normals for the mesh. So in other words, the normal map sort of doubles as the actual geo normals, and everything just sort of works. So that's what we ended up going with. So if you have time to look at those, that new feature, it's pretty cool. It allows you to create a random, a 2D texture buffer, and instead of using command buffers, use a shader and use a material to create whatever you want. Essentially a 2D system for combining shader inputs into a hardware shader, and then even chaining those together into your final result. So that was really instrumental to
Jim,
giving
I have
us.
a question.
Yes.
Was a flux capacitor involved?
Not on this one. We didn't need it.
I know, I recognize some of those words, but it all sounds super impressive, and it looks so awesome in practice.
All right, I'll stop there then.
It's super cool though, and I'll show it live, and we can tweak some of the numbers at the end to show you what it actually happens. So
And we'll be hanging out after if anyone wants to get actually more in depth on any of the questions we're going through.
So this is sort of the final version here. Let's talk about some of the Unity stuff. That was obviously a super deep dive into that particular one. But so you guys just used the vanilla 2017 one.
Almost. There were a couple of bug fixes that we needed done that have since been, I think, are in 2017.2. Yeah. But at that point, we wanted to lock and not move ahead in case anything else changed. So some of those were backported on a special build, but effectively, yes, it was 2017.1.
And I know I downloaded the product, or you got the project. It's about 50 gigs, but I'm sure it's probably like terabytes of source data and things like that. And
yeah, there's a lot.
So tell me a bit about that flow. Like you guys have your traditional VFX pipeline. I noticed you guys using Shotgun and some of the workflow stuff that you had set up. How different is this than your normal production flow? Both from the team side and from your side, I guess.
Yeah, maybe you go first,
Neil. From my side, it wasn't really that different. I mean, I definitely felt like if I was with Youngbin, who was lighting, or Avi, I noticed how real time it was. Obviously, like that was distinctly different, and it kind of messes with your head because I can hit the play button and you watch the scene again. I was not used to that, but the process, is like writing and shooting and then making it. You're still in the pipeline of computer graphics. So it didn't feel disruptive, it didn't feel different. It just felt quicker.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're still seeing, like, you're getting your dailies, and because I know you travel a lot, and like.
Yeah, I was away for quite a lot of Adam, which was unusual, but it worked perfectly. It worked like a normal job. I mean, there were no hiccups. It was quicker.
It's crazy.
It was fun.
Yeah, and like for us coming from VFX, most of the guys here, are all VFX veterans, not gaming veterans. So there was obviously some things that had to change and some stuff that we had to learn, but it was amazing how well many of our tool sets already worked. Or the software companies had already built hooks both ways. I might throw this mic down to Jeff Tetzlaff down there, or I'll pass it to you, because he did a lot of modeling and texturing. And uses Substance a lot, and that ended up working really well.
So this was the first time I ever modeled anything specifically for a real-time experience, and I'm used to going pretty far with the details and hundreds of textures and blah, blah, blah.
Understatement.
Understatement. So when we first looked at the traption guard, who is the guy who does the little salute and opens the door, the specifics were 4 texture maps, something like 150,000 polys, and that's it. That's all you get. So I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll try this. And yeah, I realized, well, okay, you make this nice low-res thing, and then the high-res, you can just model like a total wild man because it all gets mapped down, and I don't have to worry about the specifics or cleanliness of making something really detailed like you typically would for visual effects. So I just kind of went nuts, and then you map it all onto this nice, clean geo, and you're done. So that was cool. But some of the tools that we use for visual effects, like Substance Painter, which originally worked for games, was amazing. Like, we did a bunch of texture iterations on the traptions, walking through the mud. And we just built some simple shaders, and then because it's procedural, you can just hit random, and then you get 20 versions of them. Maybe you paint one guy's face a little, and that's it. So, yeah, I think the experience overall has been pretty awesome, and it worked out really well. So, yeah.
Super cool. And I know, obviously, it uses timeline extensively, and I know that you guys have done a ton of custom tracks and things, and it's one of the first things that we talked about when we started the project was how are we going to organize this so that your whole team can scale to actually use it efficiently, and it's fascinating. We'll jump to the actual live project in a bit, but I want to let Mike talk a bit about how you organize this beast.
Mostly we were worried about work division, so we broke each, and Jim wrote this great, the scene manager, so we could work in completely separate scenes, and then we could load a master scene, which would additively load those scenes in, and we could run it through on a master timeline. But then within each timeline, we further divided that work. So like the lighting team, all they saw was like a control track for characters, but if you opened up that track, that's where like all my work was, where you have like hundreds of clips, because every character has a clip for every shot. Yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna actually switch over to the live demo here,
The one
and
I
then
think
sort of show it.
I'll add to that, which is kind of cool, and maybe pull Earl and Youngbin in as well, as because like a little bit different than a game. We'd made an offline edit of this first, working more of our traditional way. Like we did a mocap shoot, did a bunch of blocking videos that got sent out, set that down to editorial, and then Neill worked as per normal with editorial that he would on any other film, back and forth, making cuts until he was happy. And so then we had to get that somehow back into the engine. And Mike made like a EDL reader.
Yeah, the way people think it'll work is you just shoot the whole scene and then you put cameras on it. But once you get into the editing, there's always pieces of time coming out or pieces of time overlapping. So we went the traditional VFX route of breaking it down into shots so that each shot could be custom directed and imported.
And we could just read that back in almost like an EDL, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the entire first piece here, and you can see how many different scenes that they've got loaded, but most of it is deactive. So like you mentioned, the scene loader, so as I scrub through here, it'll like turn on and off different scenes, and I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, or...
Yeah, well, maybe I'll add to some of because there's more going on than obviously just the performance capture for the main characters. We also have like another, 70 background traptions or so.
Yeah. So the crowd, for example, is another use of nested timelines, is that throwing all the crowd characters, so there's like 70 guys with 70 tracks, and instead of trying to like slide all those around to fit a shot, you just kind of make the whole crowd into one timeline, do a master track in your main timeline of that crowd, and then it lets you like fine tune the timing and placement of that whole crowd as a unit on a shot by shot basis. So the nested timeline thing turned out to be a really powerful tool for doing this work.
So that's this scene here, and you can see that you've got the characters, caches, crowd, the lens flares, the lighting, it's all crazy, and then you've got your like custom focus pulling tracks and f-stop tracks.
Earl, how'd you guys actually create the 70 more clips of animation?
Yeah, as both Chris and Corey have said, we did the initial mocap shoot of all the sort of main characters, foreground characters, and that would be up to 6 characters at a time. And we were fortunate enough at Oats to actually have our own mocap stage. So we would compose everything with the main characters, and then we sent that off to editorial. And then throughout the whole process, we could just jump up and go into the mocap suite and record our own performances for all the background characters. So all the traptions that are walking on the road that are in the background, all those guys sitting around the main group, those are all performances of most of these guys here and other people in the office just putting the suits on and jumping into the mocap suite. And the iteration process with having all that capability right in our studio was so fast that the next day we could have bunches of animation in, not maybe necessarily fully cleaned up, but that would already give us an idea, and Neill an idea of how to compose or where we were going to add some shots. And so yeah, it was a really, really quick and efficient process. And then I would just, you know, for a lot like the traptions on the road, I would just make cycles out of all what we captured, and then hand them over to Mike, and he would just interactively place them wherever he needed them and could compose the shot best. So
super cool. I don't know, is there anything else that you guys want to show in the project, or?
Maybe the one other thing that people may or may not find interesting from a visual effects to a real-time workflow is lighting. And YB, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, because I know for you guys it was definitely quite different in certain ways.
Yeah, so like first of all, like the real-time feedback was amazing for me, and this is like the first time I used work with the game engine. But then like the real-time, but like I wasn't aware of like how the quality, how amount like quality the game engine nowadays can provide us. I was just blown away by that. And in the timeline, we have something called a switch active track, which is you can, because we're exporting a movie file, like a movie, we can set up lighting shot by shot differently. So sometimes you want to have lighting, rim light, cast the character from here, and sometimes you want to cast from the other side of the character. So we can do it by using a switch active track, and that was amazing.
How hard was it to achieve like we saw the concept art and then the final? How hard would you, like, is it close? Is it like pretty close to the final?
The end result is better to me than I expected it to be. I mean, I'm really proud of what these guys did, you know, and what Unity did. Yeah, no. I'm super stoked with the end result. It looks amazing. The one thing that I keep seeing here that still weirds me out is like you've paused it, but the flares are still active.
Yeah.
That is still so weird to me that it like truly is calculating everything in real time like that. Is like it's just odd. That should take 30 minutes to render.
Yeah, like
it's very strange.
It was very strange for me too. Like even scheduling it is just so much different than typical VFX, because you know, you're starting to get a little bit worried. You're like, man, this asset's not quite done. Neill just gave notes. I just gave notes. Like, when the heck is this going to show up? And they'd do the notes, and normally it'd be like, then it would go through an approval phase, and you'd get like test renders of it and things like that. But here it was just like, oh, I did them, or they wouldn't even have told me yet. I'd just open up Unity, and I'd be checking something else. And I'm like, oh,
it's implemented.
It's already all there, like in the whole thing. Like the whole film already has it. It was very trippy.
Yeah, and you can see here, so you had, so you've got like your effects scene, your set scene, your lighting scene, the timeline scene with, so the whole team was able to literally work on the same scenes and shots at the same time, which is, I'm assuming, very different.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally the whole thing is live all the time. Mm-hmm. So any update everyone can get at any time, and it's not just updated in that shot or in that asset, but the whole film. Right. It just has it right away.
Yeah, you know who isn't here, who's awesome, is Eric Laguerre, who rigged everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And just looking at this, he got, if anyone here has seen any of the Oats films, if you've seen Zygote, he got the Zygote creature working in Unity, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah.
With like thousands and thousands and thousands of joints.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a rigging monster.
We should do a Zygote version of Adam at some point.
We should, yeah.
Absolutely.
The other thing that might be interesting to people maybe is the flare system, like the lens flare system. We used a lot of optics in here, and Mike kind of scripted up. I don't know if you want to talk about it, a little bit of a custom sort of setup.
Did you grab it? Yeah. It was mostly that After Effects plugin where, so normally lens flares that people do in games don't really change as you move around. So all we really added was a little feature where its proximity to the edge of frame would cause other elements to come in, or like fade in or change brightness or change size. So as the flares, I don't know if you can just pick one and move it, like the main flare.
Well, it's like that real camera property of once you're not even looking at the flare and you continue to pan.
Yeah, and you get that light spill.
It's bouncing
on
inside the
opposite
lens.
side. Yeah.
And that's really what feels super real. And a lot of that actually is in the second film with some of the sunlight.
Yeah, so the system's pretty simple, and then we had an artist dedicated to doing lens flares who just loves lens flares.
That one, just go back to where she comes
and he used that system with lots of custom elements to get that really realistic look.
Oh yeah,
go back more.
A lot of photographic actual lens flare, real elements from our VFX library, and then used in this system and just placed. And then they trigger on edges or center or different things, trying to simulate what like a much more physical system.
That's awesome. Yeah, let's. I'm going to show you the sneak peek of the next short.
Work in progress.
Yeah, work in progress. But let me find that here. Everyone's going to run away. No. Oh, it's on the other PC. Except that's not that one. It's this one. Uh-oh, I broke the thing. Go. There we go.
The switcher is made by Unreal.
I didn't say it. Oh. Is that playing?
You want to know what you are. The mirror can tell you who you once were. She knows your histories, your crimes.
There's another one we'll look for.
Okay, so let's open up for a couple questions from the audience. We've got some mics up front, and I'm gonna find another thing that we're gonna show you. So. Yeah, I do. Can we switch the screen to just logo for a sec? I don't know how to do that. No.
Go ahead, man.
Hey, that was totally awesome. Thanks for the sneak peek with the extra trailer too. As I was watching, I started thinking, because you guys did it in real time, how did you make sure that the hardware differences between your different computers versus the final renderer didn't affect it? Because in a movie, if you're doing it off-site, you kind of know it's going to come out perfect, as opposed to a real-time render.
Well, so these are real-time renders. I think maybe people, like the system actually runs at 30 FPS, and all of our workstations are spec'd to be the same, just because that's how we set the studio up. So everyone's, or more or less the same. So everyone's machine effectively could run it the same way at any time. And anytime we wanted to render it out, there's just a track in Timeline that's like a frame recorder. It didn't run at 30 FPS, and that's just I/O, because we actually were running it out at 4K. So you'd just hit play, and it would just run your frames out, and that was it.
Cool.
What's up, guys? This question's for Neill. Your world building in all your movies and content you've done is pretty amazing. But you only give us District 9, you only give us Chappie, these 2-hour-long adventures.
Right.
Does something like Unity open up the possibility for Oats to create larger worlds or series of the same world?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting parts about it, is trying to be able to operate in a way where you can show the audience as much as you can, as many ideas as you can come up with, but to find a way to do that in the most efficient way possible. So obviously, like, to do something like Elysium costs a lot of money, but maybe there's a way to get sort of 90% of the way there at way less money and do more of them. So there's like a lot of different renditions of worlds that we want to create. So Chris and I speak about this a lot, and I think real time is the way to do a lot of that. So serialized stuff. The other thing that Oats was sort of created for, which is like vignettes, little ideas of things, and maybe you do 3 or 4 of them, and one is really cool, and it's like, okay, let's make more of this one. All of this is perfect for that. That is definitely part of what we're thinking.
What's up, guys, over here? So I apologize if this is a little off topic. I know it wasn't really kind of brought up a heck of a whole lot, but in my opinion, a huge character in the short was the audio and the sound. So I'm curious, coming from a film background, what were the challenges for creating and integrating audio into Unity, And then kind of generally speaking, what was the pipeline, process for you guys working with the audio team, going from ideation to iteration to ultimately validation?
Well, we've been talking about putting this film into a VR setting, in which case all of the sounds need to be imported into Unity, so we have some sort of three-dimensional representation of where the sounds are and that they're allocated to objects. But for a two-dimensional playout to YouTube, which is where we were going to put this, we only focused on the imagery being real-time. There was no need to have a separate audio layer that was embedded, because no one at the moment is loading up the scene file and walking around inside of it, although we should do that. So at the moment, we don't have audio inside of the scene file. We have an audio from our sound designers in Vancouver that do all the Oats stuff as a separate pass, the same way we would do any film. It's just that these images were created in real time. Does that make sense? So now, as we're about to get into maybe porting this out to VR, we will hand all of those sounds and stems and everything else to the VR department that will start assigning them to 3D objects in the space, from voice to the sound of the robots to whatever.
Perfect. Thank you.
My question was about VR. If you could just speak a little bit more how you think that's going to change the experience of watching these things, because you're talking about the details of lighting shot by shot, but suddenly you have a user coming in and kind of they're the camera person themselves.
No, totally. And also, I mean, the way that this was conceived wasn't, we didn't initially go about it thinking that we were going to do it in VR. It was like, let's make more films like the first Atom piece. It's only when you really are inside of it and it's like what I was saying about the lens flares. When you hit stop, but the system is still active, so the flares are still fluttering. It's like, oh, actually, maybe it's worth figuring out how to port this out to VR just to walk around inside it and see it and experience it. So the lighting won't be perfect in certain areas or certain locations because it wasn't designed for that experience. But I think for us, retrofitting it for VR teaches us stuff about when we decide to do an explicit VR piece. It's like, okay, these are the things that we learned. So there's a high possibility that this may come out as a downloadable VR experience just because we're all sort of learning.
Hello. First of all, great work, guys. Like, I love the mirror and I love all Oats stuff, especially like the sushi machine one. I like that more without human
Cooking
hair.
with Bill?
Yeah, if you could send me one that doesn't have human hair in it.
Cool.
But in all seriousness, amazing work. And then I just wonder when I look at it that it seems like you guys are, it's like you're new and green to Unity. So that makes it even more amazing. So if you could talk a little bit about the learning curve, like how did you get from you starting with Unity to what we're seeing here, and how long did it take even?
I think that's for Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, not all of us are new to Unity. Most of the team was our standard Oats VFX team, and then we brought in some, I'll call them experts, David, Jim, Mike, and Jeff, to sort of help the guys get up to speed. So I don't know who feels like talking about their experience that's new. Oh.
I just had to hit a different export button on my animation, and then that's my different experience.
I was new to Unity. I've worked with many other game engines before, but for me it was super simple to ramp up, and I could also see I had 3 other people on my team. 2 of them had never used the game engine before. They ramped up real fast as well. I was actually quite impressed how quickly they ramped up. The UI is not cluttered. It's really simple concepts. It was quite impressive, actually, because I've worked with some real pigs before, engine-wise, that are more coder-based than artist-friendly sort of things. So yeah, I was quite impressed.
Thank you.
Cooking with Bill is coming out in Unity soon as well. Yeah.
Hey, ex-VFX artist who moved over to real-time a while ago. You mentioned that you broke everything down into the usual sequence shots. Does that, since you're working in real time, does that really make sense considering the whole cut's live all the time? Does it make better sense to hit it as a sequence asset? And then another question is, what do you do with all your compositors now that are twiddling thumbs?
Well, The first question is purely creative, right? It's not a technical question. It's like we shot a lot of material on a motion capture stage, and you want to just identify what your favorite takes are, what your favorite performance. We shot live cameras when we did mocap, but we also, once we had locked into the favorite performance and assembled it, we shot cameras again later and just fired up the action. But in both cases, I was working with an editor that I've worked with a lot who cut most of the Oats pieces, and you're just creatively sitting in a two-dimensional setting in an edit bay making a film. So that may not make the most sense maybe in terms of like a purely technical perspective, but from a creative perspective it does. The compositors, on the other hand, are not going to be involved in this stuff, but we have other live action pieces in future that we want to use them for.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, Mike Shand, who is a VFX soup / comp artist on this show, just because he wanted to be part of Oats, old friend of mine, he's the guy that did all the lens flares. He was, happy to just sit there and make lens flares.
Yeah.
Hi. I visit some studios, production studios, animation studios, film studios, and something that I hear sometimes about real-time filmmaking is, oh, this much of freedom is dangerous. Like people can iterate forever and they will never get there. So after this production, do you think it's a case, or if the freedom is actually real freedom?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think for me personally, I don't really see there being that much of an issue with that, because I think if you're not exactly sure what you're going for, that could be a problem. But we tend to like do pretty distinct concept art and have photographic reference, and we don't really veer from that too much. So I think when we feel like we've gotten to the goal, it's kind of there. I think if you are finding something, if it doesn't exist, and you truly are like in a place of almost visual R&D, that could be dangerous. But the remedy to that is when you run out of money. So that will be there.
But it's true, like it is a potential danger if you don't have a clear vision of where you want to go, and you have no self-restraint. Then yeah, it's going to be a problem. But I mean, those are different issues.
Sean has no self-constraint.
Oh, you guys want to say something?
It also helps to have a VFX supervisor like Chris, because he'll stop you when you're done.
Yeah, I know that.
I'll add to that. Sometimes it's dangerous when you have a supervisor like Chris, because he'll change something at the end. One of the funny things that I was laughing about this is that I was finishing an asset literally days before coming here, and you can do that. Typically in visual effects, is 4 months out, you're already on the next whatever 20 Marvel movies, but and those guys make crazy changes all the time, but there you have these huge costly renders, whereas here you can change it half an hour before coming here, run it out, and go, it's done. So
actually we had a less iteration than like when we were working on the film, because if something's not right and something looks wrong, Chris would come over and he would just fix it for himself, and then like then we can render it.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Actually, there's actually quite a bit to say to that. Actually, especially on the lick death part. I tried to keep my part short and sweet, and ended up being too short. But this is a good opportunity, because at a certain point there was a problem with just kind of how things were turning out with the lighting setup that we had. Both on skin shading, which is a huge problem always. But it was, Chris just made a call and he said, how about let's not use this lighting, which changes the entire set, like the material tweaking, the skin scattering, reflection, everything. But that kind of iteration happened, over a span of a day?
Like hours.
Yeah, which couldn't have been done, I don't think, in traditional VFX. So.
To be fair, it wasn't really just my idea. Like quite a number of us had talked about it, made a change, and then Neill made the call. But it shouldn't be detrimental. It should enhance the creativity, I think, is what all of us are trying to say. If you have a clear idea, you know where you want to go, you're able to make changes very late in the game that can be very, very beneficial. So it's a huge benefit, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Speaking of making changes late in the game, let's. I found the other clip, so let's. This is never before seen. So, let me get some audio, please.
Yes. Tell me, what happened to you, my sweet, sweet Marion?
There was a ventilation problem in our tenement.
Very small glimpse.
Cool. Thank you very much. This is thanks for the Oats. Thanks to the Oats team for coming. Thanks for you guys for coming. It's been awesome. We're so proud of what you guys created and honored that you made it with Unity. And we're gonna hang out for a couple minutes, I guess. If you got any other questions, come up, and we'll see you at the party tonight. Thank you.